Okay, now we're going to talk about computer cases. So the computer case, the case helps contain electromagnetic interference if it's metal, and then we abbreviate that with EMI. Large cases usually have more expansion capability and are easier to work with because you have more room to get in there and move around. Smaller cases usually have less expansion potential and support fewer internal devices. So you can't add more hard drives, you can't add a bigger fan, that kind of thing. You're kind of limited with the space requirements that you have. Cases with more features cost more, obviously, and you should never run a computer with an open case. You need the airflow to run across the computer components, although people do it quite a bit. So when you're working with cases, some of the older ones had very sharp edges. The newer ones are all rounded on the edges, so they're less likely to cut you, but if you scrape your knuckles across them, they can still get you. If you hit a screw or something like that, some of the metal venting. So you want to be really careful when you're handling a case, especially some of the older ones, and some of them, like for the server racks and things like that, are very heavy. They're deceptively heavy. So they're sitting in a rack, you slide them out, they slide out real easy, and you go to pick it up, you can mess up your back or drop it on your foot. I've seen people break their toes, and break the servers, which can be thousands of dollars. So you want to be very careful. It's always a good idea to have two people when you're messing with a server, just in case, because you don't know how heavy they're going to be. And they're just cumbersome sometimes, right? Some of them are the size of a pizza box, some of them are twice that, 2 pizza boxes put together. So these white boxes, not too bad. Like I said, the biggest fear you have is cutting your hand on them, or when you pull these blank plates out, they leave sharp edges and things like that. Motherboards. Before replacing a motherboard, double check all other components to verify that the motherboard is the problem. It's the most expensive component, so it's the last thing you want to change before changing it. You want to replace rather than repair a damaged motherboard. You don't want to repair a motherboard, just change it out. Consider purchase and interoperability issues. So should you upgrade? Should you just flat out swap it out with the same kind, or should you get something else? If you're going to switch it, the devil is in the details. Make sure that all of your connectors will still fit. Make sure that your power supply connector is still the right one and that the power is adequate for the new hardware. With respect to chipsets, this is a very big one. So chipsets in a computer are very important. Chipsets in a computer are very critical component in selecting them. So the chipset helps the CPU manage and control the computer. It does a lot of the work, it interfaces with a lot of the parts, it gives you a lot of features, for example, RAID and things like that. The chipset that goes along on the motherboard gives you those features. You can add daughter boards, like secondary cards that plug into the motherboard that'll do this kind of thing, but if you can get it built into the motherboard, it's a lot better, it's a lot faster. You don't have that other board blocking airflow and things like that. The CPU must be compatible with the chipset. Usually you get them on the motherboard, they're already there, so they're compatible. They're designed to be, and they're already tested with those motherboards. Specialized chips control cache, memory, and high-speed buses, so they're very, very critical that you get a good chipset. It's worth researching these chipsets before you settle on one. Different chipsets have different onboard components, and they support different components. Like some may support bigger hard drives, some only support hard drives up to such and such a size. Some may only support certain types of DVD drives or something like that. Onboard components might have fewer features than do expansion card versions. So they might not have the feature support that all of your expansion can give you, or vice versa, right? You might have a whole lot of features that you'll never get to use because you can't get the cards in there. So read-only memory basic input-output system, the ROM BIOS. So ROM BIOS chips, this is the chip that controls the motherboard. The second you turn the power on, it kind of starts everything off. It's called the ROM, or the BIOS, the basic input-output system. It's a read-only memory. The chips store basic input-output system data, even when the computer power is off, especially when the computer power is off. So that's when they're most critical. You want to be able to turn the computer on and it still support everything that you've got, right? You can't leave it on all the time. So the system BIOS prepares the hardware to run. It performs a lot of memory checks and all kinds of system checks and things of that nature. It gets everything set up and ready to go. The classes of BIOS chips include core chips, updatable complementary metal oxide semiconductor chips, so complementary metal oxide semiconductor chips, CMOS. Other chips with their own BIOS data. So there's several different, there's AMI and Amiga, the two big ones today, the big manufacturers. There's also a big effort because we're getting all these chips and everything from overseas that the BIOSes are coming tainted with little programs. So I can add a program on, like there's certain AV on certain manufacturer boards that has special little code that they've embedded into most BIOS systems on certain manufactured computers. And if you add this AV to the machine, it'll self-heal. So if I wipe the OS and I'm like, I don't want this AV on here, so I'll wipe the OS, whoever's controlling that software on the other end can force it to self-heal on my system. So via the BIOS, when the computer's booting up, they can reinstall the AV on my system. And they can gain all kinds of information from my system. They can gain the system, so to speak. They have all kinds of information and access to a lot of stuff. There are certain manufacturers that support that kind of thing. Well, there's one that I know of for sure.